All right, everybody, welcome to this very special conversation hosted by the Institute on Religion and Democracy. I am Marc Tooley, president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy, and I will only speak to you very briefly just to express my appreciation to our speakers this evening, both of whom are old friends. Yoram Hazoni, who came all the way from Israel to be here with us magnificently, and Joshua Mitchell, who came all the way from Maryland to be with us. So also very grateful to him. But it should be a very stimulating conversation between the two of them. There will be plenty of time for questions and comments afterwards. The conversation will be moderated by my colleague, Marc LiVecche, who is executive editor of Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy. This conversation is broadcasting live online, and the video will post later in case you want to review it for further examination and thought, and hopefully share it with your friends. So, gentlemen, thank you, and have been looking forward to this.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you, everybody, for coming. My job is very short. I just get the privilege of introducing our two speakers. First up will be Yoram Hazoni. Yoram is the chairman of the Edmund Burke Foundation, and he is the author of a couple of excellent books. The second one you'll have to take my word for. It's not out yet, but it will be out
any day now.
Any day now, imminently. The first book is The Virtue of Nationalism. The incoming book is Conservatism, a Rediscovery. All right, and he's going to be speaking about conservatism, a rediscovery tonight. The question he is asking is, what does it actually mean to conserve something? Or, what would it take for conservatives to actually conserve something? And then second up will be, as Marc has said, Joshua Mitchell, who teaches political theory at Georgetown. He is the senior fellow at the Common Sense Society, and he is a Washington fellow at the Claremont Center for American Life. And he will be speaking somewhat antipodally on what does it mean to unconserve, or the three great unconserving movements or false religions. So first up, Yoram Hazoni. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. This is my first talk on a pretty much endless book tour, which my publishers and friends have scheduled for me. So you're hearing it here first. It'll be a little bit rough and bumpy. If you were at the other end of the tour, then it would already be a stump speech, and it would, I'd already know all the answers to the questions, but tonight I'm just not going to. As Marc said, the purpose of this new book, the book is called Conservatism, a Rediscovery, and the purpose of the book is to try to answer the question, what would it actually look like if conservatives were actually going to conserve something? Now, obviously, there's some background to this question. I'm pretty sure that anybody in the audience is familiar with the question, which is that there has been a thing called the conservative movement explicitly, in the United States for decades and decades and decades. And some of us who are older, we've been involved for decades and decades and decades. And certainly you can make the positive case for the good things that the conservative movement has done, but no small number of us, and I'm certainly one of them, look back on, I joined up in the 1980s when I was in college. We founded a magazine, like a Reaganite magazine called the Princeton Tory, and so that's a long time. And during those couple of generations that have passed since then, pretty much what we've gotten to see is, I apologize if this sounds too dramatic. This is in fact the way I see it. I think a lot of people do. What we've seen is the uprooting, the weakening, the attenuating, the dissolving of all of these institutions and ideas that had once been a cornerstone. I'm talking about really basic things. The idea that there is a God, creator of heaven and earth, who rewards and punishes. or that there's a God at all. The idea that there is a scripture, that there is a Bible that provides us with some kind of guidance that we can rely on. And then along with those things which were already pushed out of the public square by during the 1960s and thereafter, but along with these things, all sorts of other things that we thought, I think a lot of people thought, you can do without God and the Bible, you can just use reason and get to, the right answers. But what we've seen is that doesn't work so well. And in fact, very basic things, the nation, should we continue to have independent nations, or should we just, be part of a universal globalist order? The family is something that, not 2 generations ago, pretty much everyone in society thought that they knew what a family was and understood that it was a good. Even the idea of man and woman is something that's difficult for us. Really, really difficult. And you could just go on and on. For those of us who were born into somewhat, traditional, or who joined somewhat traditional communities, Christian, Jewish, other faith communities that are built around transmitting institutions and ideas, this looks like a catastrophe. And I should quickly say that this is not just a religious matter; it's equally a political matter. Because if a couple of generations ago there was a pretty solid consensus in let's say in the United States around the Constitution as the framework for a common life together, and the idea of democratic elections where each side contests, but then then the side that loses concedes the election, and then there's a peaceful transition of government. And it's scary to say, but at least the last 2 American elections, you can actually count a little bit further back, at least the last 2 American elections have been highly contested and have not led to the kind of transition that I knew when I was growing up, where one side says, okay, you won this time, and next time we'll win, but this time it's your right to govern. No, that tradition, that fundamental tradition for what makes America a great democratic nation, it's also on the ropes, and so are many other things. I won't continue the catalog. I think people know what it is that I'm talking about, and so in the public debate, which at this point I think at this point the public debate is it's no longer a debate between sort of a post-war lefty social liberal kind of FDR kind of thing, and a post-war right of center, more libertarian thing, with both sides agreeing that there's that there are fundamental traditions that everybody agrees on. That whole structure, I think it's basically gone. I think the hegemony of that structure is gone, and in its place, what we see is a neo-Marxist woke movement, which has just in the last few years had astonishing success in seizing control of the public discourse, and many, maybe even most of the institutions that used to be responsible for it. On the political right, there's this new movement which is called national conservatism, and both Josh and I are founding members of it. And obviously, people argue about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and we can talk about that more later. But I should point out that that even if the the attacks on national conservatism coming from from the center and from the left, even if they're completely unjustified, as I believe, it doesn't change the fact that on the far right, there are plenty of people who are increasingly vocal and increasingly visible and have an increasing following, who are explicit in saying the American experiment in republicanism and self-government has failed, and the alternative, the only reasonable alternative, is one or another kind of dictatorship. You know, so, and this is, there are secularists who say this, there are atheists who say it, there are religious Christians who say it. There's all sorts of crazy, strange things, but they're growing. And so that's the map. The map is, there's this beleaguered discourse that's very similar to what we've known since World War II in a lot of ways, but it's a small minority, and some of us are trying to actively rethink what went wrong, and that includes a criticism of, by conservatives, of the conservative movement as we've known it, and that criticism focuses on the question which lots and lots of people ask, especially young people, ask me all the time, is, you want me to be a conservative, but what have you conserved? And, so I can name a couple of things, but it doesn't matter, because the thrust of the question is fundamentally correct. It doesn't look like America's going to make it like this. It doesn't look like the West is going to make it like this. We're at a very, very difficult moment. And if we can't rethink and come up with an answer to the question, what would you actually need to do if you were going to actually conserve any of these things I've named, or anything else that's of significance to you? If you can't answer that question, then then it's hopeless. Then we don't know which direction is up and which direction is down. We don't know what we should do and what we shouldn't do. In other words, we're completely clueless. Now, in any case, God's going to make these decisions. It's in God's hands. But between here and God deciding what's going to happen, all of us have our energies and our wit and what wisdom we have, and the power and strength that we have in us to fight in order to at this point, even preserving is certainly not enough, to restore, to bring about a restoration of at least some of these fundamental things that made America America, that made Christendom Christendom, that made a world of God-fearing nations a possibility, for quite some time. And our job is to figure out how to restore this. Okay, so the book is about that. It opens with that question. The book deals with all sorts of subsidiary questions. There's historical chapters that deal with the historic conservative movement in England and in America. There's current affairs chapters. There's a personal chapter about my wife and I in college, and how and why we became conservatives, and how we decided to adopt a conservative life, to become conservative people. And that's one of the central issues that the book deals with, is this question of, is it really enough to say, oh, well, I'm a conservative because I support the following policy things, and I'll go and vote for it, every 4 years or every 2 years. And I argue it's not enough. That as long as people are not plugging into an actual conservative community, a community that hands down traditions and is actually capable of teaching conservation, then it's not going to work. You can't just say I'm a conservative in my public life, but then you go home and you lead like a libertarian existence with almost, nobody's fooled. They know you give good speeches, but they see how you live, and they imitate the way you live. They don't learn from your lofty words. They learn from the way you live. And so the book is in part an argument about plugging into conservative society, to conservative congregations that know how to hand things down. Okay, so those things are in the book. I'm not going to deal with them, at least in my opening remarks. Maybe we can talk about it later. But there's also a large political theory section in the book. And the purpose of that political theory section is to try to answer this question. What are human beings like, and what are human societies like, and what mistakes have we made in thinking about what human beings are like, such that we can't conserve anything? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to focus on one of the key concepts, which is the concept of honor. I mean, I think people intuitively know that honor is not a word that really fits so well in the society that we live in. I mean, people immediately go to sort of substitutes like respect. You know, you need to respect everybody, and dignity. Everybody has a certain amount of dignity that is appropriate to them as human beings, and these things are true. And I don't disagree. I don't mean to denigrate them in any way, but it's not enough. In a conservative society, a society that knows how to conserve things, there's an additional term that's called honor. Okay, it's in the Ten Commandments, where we're told honor your father and your mother. And part of what the book does is to try to understand what honoring is. Okay, I go back to the Hebrew. It's kind of interesting that in the original Hebrew, the word for honoring is lechabed. It literally means give weight, give weightiness, give importance to your father and your mother. And the underlying assumption here is that is that you can actively make your parents more important or less important with the things you say, the things you do, the things you say in their presence. Do you speak to them in a way that makes them feel like they're heavier, like they're more, like they're important, like they have significance in your world and in the world generally? Do you speak that way? Do you speak that way in their presence? Do you speak that way when they're absent, when other people are listening, family members, or just friends in the community? Do you talk about them like they're weighty, like they have importance? And in a traditional society, I mean, this is certainly in a biblical society, but I think in a lot of traditional societies, even beyond biblical society, the assumption is that our words and deeds have the power to make our parents more important in the world, in an objective sense. Children that talk about their parents like they're important, people say, oh, wow, they're more important than I thought. This really happens. People can tell when you think your parents are important, people can tell, and they think that your parents are more important. And when children, I'm not just talking about, small children, I'm not just talking about adolescents, I'm talking about adult children, their whole lives, not just, it doesn't end when you're 18 or 20, I'm talking about your entire life. If you speak about your parents in a way that tells the world, these are really, really important people, you actually make them more important in the eyes of others. And the Bible also has a commandment of later, not in the Ten Commandments, there's also a commandment to not make light of your parents, and it's exactly the opposite. It's not just you're not allowed to make fun of your parents. You're not allowed to treat your parents as though they're unimportant. Now, this issue of the parents, it then expands. There's a commandment to honor older people, right? You want to know what a society looks like when people don't know what the commandment to honor older people is like? Well, all you need to do is look at the video clip of President Biden standing at the White House reception with everybody ignoring the senior, the most distinguished, the most important person in the room, and everybody makes light of him. Everybody makes light of him. There's no one there to talk to him like he's important. There's no one there who's saying that's the decision maker, and you may be saying, well, that's because he's not. But then you don't understand the commandment, because the commandment is, look, there's a different commandment is speak the truth and stay away from lies. That's all true. But honor, that's a different issue. The question of, are you going to leave this this old man by himself while Barack Obama glad handles everybody in the room? That is a question of whether your society is capable of understanding where honor is due. And they're not. They're not, and most of us are not. Almost all of us find this difficult. Okay, so there are many places in a traditional society where honor is due, where you owe it to your elders, to your teachers, to government officials, to people who serve in the military, to people who are married, to people who have experience. There's a whole economy of honors that a conservative society teaches its children to to hand out, and then as they get older, to receive. Okay, because the older you get, the more the next generation then owes you. That's the way that it works. Now, what does this have to do with conservation? Well, there's an involved argument in the book. I'll make it here in very brief, and I don't expect everybody to just say, oh, wow, yeah, that's true. But for your consideration, what if it turns out that as a general rule, people are incapable of learning anything unless they're giving honor to the person that they're supposed to be learning from? I mean, just think. The substitute teacher comes into the classroom, and are you capable of honoring that substitute teacher? No. The moment the substitute teacher walks in the classroom, all Dickens breaks loose, and the substitute teacher is, the goal is to humiliate and embarrass, preferably to make the substitute teacher cry. Look, I'm not complaining too much. Kids are kids. I understand the whole thing. It's not something terrible, but that model, that situation of somebody who deserves some degree of honor but isn't getting it, that is the paradigm. That's the model for a situation where you can't learn anything. You're thinking that you're important enough to judge the substitute teacher and to laugh at the substitute teacher. That is the mechanism that makes it impossible for you to learn anything from them. And if adolescents get to the point where they mock their parents and don't take them seriously, they can no longer learn anything from them. And if they think that about the local pastor, minister, priest, rabbi, if they mock them, if they don't know to give honor to them, they also can't learn from them. Their minds shut like a drum. And so a society that is conserving, that is transmitting and restoring and learning and passing something important down from one generation to the next, is always a society in which the children are taught to give honor, and in which grown-ups who didn't learn it in childhood, they realize that there's something wrong, and they make themselves learn how to do it in adulthood. Okay, so now let's go back to what we began with, which is America over the last couple of generations, and what really was lost. I named all these institutions that are in danger of simply being swept away by history. I named all of these ideas. But what was really the fundamental thing that was lost was that people, in the name of all sorts of beautiful things, the name of equality, which has beautiful, important things about it, in the name of liberty, which has all sorts of obviously important things about it, in the name of these ideals, egalitarianism and individual liberties, things that we certainly don't want to give up, but in the name of those things, we gave up on the capacity to give honor where it's due. We gave up on the capacity to say, look, the most important thing is that children be able to honor their parents and their teachers. Okay, and now step out of the family and the congregation and think about the country. Think about the way that politicians talk about one another. Who gives honor? Look, if honor is not given, if one political party is not capable of giving honor to the other political party, if it's endless war, endless contempt, there's never a moment where you say, and I actually respect my honorable opponent in this debate, and here's why. You're totally incapable of it. And I submit to you that America is almost entirely incapable of that at this point. Just go back and look at the Kennedy-Nixon debates from the 60s, or the Reagan-Mondale debates, or Reagan-Carter. Just listen to the way they talk. They're not talking, they're not shouting each other down. They're not saying, you're a criminal, you should be behind bars. There's an actual alliance, an unspoken alliance between these competing parties. And I'm sure that they dislike one another plenty. They may even hate each other, but they love their country more. And as a consequence, they say, it's my responsibility to give honor to my opponent. Why? Because what if he wins? If he wins, he has to be able to govern. Right? The goal isn't to make it impossible for him to govern. The opposite. The goal is to make it possible for there to be a smooth transition so he or she can govern. And in return, they'll hopefully, they'll honor me by consulting with me, by including me. That doesn't mean that things will go my way, but maybe when it's really important to me, maybe they'll honor me by giving me something that's important to me. That kind of thing, it is almost dead in America. And it's almost dead because of the fact that as children and as teenagers and as young adults, we aren't trained to give honor. We're only trained to say, I've thought about my parents, and the truth is I think that they're really not very good as parents. And then you start explaining. So that we can all do great. Every time I talk about this kind of thing, people start to say, yeah, but what if my parents were just god awful? And the answer is well, tough luck, because the commandment is given to us because it's hard, not because it's easy, not because it's like the natural thing that every kid does. It's given to us because it's hard. And the same thing is true at the national level. By the way, the same thing is true in a marriage. You want to know why people can't keep a marriage together? I'm not talking about people who don't care about marriage anymore. I'm talking about two young people who want to stay together for life. Why can't they keep their marriage together? Why? The reason that they can't keep their marriage together is because they don't understand that you can't always tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to your wife, to your husband. What if the thing that you're saying is so hurtful that they're not going to be able to think straight for a week? You have to learn to give honor. We used to say that to people. We used to say, honor your husband and your wife. So now I'm telling you that if you want there to be love after 30 years in a marriage, the only way is if you honor one another. If you give honor to one another, where honor is given, love grows, loyalty grows, the capacity for cohesion grows. That's true in the family, and it's true at the national level. Okay, so what I'm describing is, I think, a missing foundation in political theory, the way that it's taught to us. Maybe you can find, in I don't know, anthropology or sociology classes, they talk about primitive societies, they have shame, they have honor. Isn't it wonderful that we've overcome this? But we haven't overcome it. We're exactly like that, except for the fact that when we cease to give honor, when we're constantly shaming, when we don't know how or to whom honor is owed, when we get to that point, all we do is smash every relationship. We smash our marriages. We smash our relationships with our parents and with our grandparents, and the relationships that are supposed to bind rival political parties in a democracy. We never talk about it, ever. We think it just comes, but it doesn't just come. All right, so in order to have conservation of a reverence for God, for Scripture, right? Well, you would have to honor Scripture. You would have to honor people who study Scripture. You would have to honor people who know Scripture and speak from Scripture and talk about it and teach it, instead of saying, oh, that's not important. We outgrew that. I mean, that's the worst thing. It's not the people who say, that the Bible, they hate the Bible, it's stupid. They at least know what they're doing. They know that what they're doing is dishonoring the Bible and eliminating it as a possible aspect of the discourse in our society. But what about all the people, the religious people, the conservatives, who give lecture after lecture about the importance of religion, the importance of religion, the importance of morals, but they'll never actually open the Bible and talk to you about the Bible. Come on, I'm an educated person. I talk about, natural law and natural theology. Everything is reason. I'm never going to talk about the Bible. But if you don't ever talk about the Bible, guess what? You've dishonored. You've created the American public school, where for an entire week, everybody has the best of reasons to never mention God or the Bible all week long. And everybody has all these great theories to explain it. But where honor is not given, dishonor is what takes its place. Where to spend a week in school and never mention God or Scripture is to dishonor God and Scripture. You can come up with all the fancy theories you want. This is what's happened in America. I'm not talking about religious belief. I'm talking about the ability to say, this was the foundation of our civilization. Good things came of it. Let's think about what those are. You know, you don't need belief for that. You just need to know where honor is due. You need to know that you've come here because of the generations that believed in these things and that you owe them something. All right, so if we were to begin revising political theory in such a way that it didn't just look at, my rights, my freedoms, the ways in which I want to be equal, but actually looked at what it takes to hold the society together and to take the good aspects of the society and push them forward, and to have enough of that cohesion so that when there's something that needs to be fixed, you can fix it without destroying everything. You can make changes without a total revolution. If we knew how to do that, in order to know how to do that, we would have to have a completely different political theory, and that would be a conservative political theory. That would be a traditionalist political theory, in the sense that people would learn, what traditions give to us and what is needed in order to conserve them. The key to the whole thing would end up being teaching honor where it's due, figuring out where it's due. That would be a different conservatism. That's the conservatism we have to have now if we're going to change course at all. Thank you.
Always inspiring to be with Yoram. Apropos one of his early remarks, if you look at the last sentence of Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, it reads the following: "While the parties are busying themselves with tomorrow, I have tried to see the whole of the future." What he saw was exactly the split that we're having right now. You've got kind of hard right, reactionary, hard left, and we have to find something in the middle that we can carry on from generation to generation. So Tocqueville saw this problem in the 1830s. He seemed to think that it wasn't, it was linked in some manner to the emergence of this democratic age, and I'll say a bit more about that. So Yoram's writing and speaking about conserving, and I thought I'd talk about un-conserving. Strange word. But that's what I'm doing, and I put together a sketch, and sometimes it's a high-level sketch and sometimes it's a low-level sketch. There's a puzzle that I'm wrestling with, and I've wrestled with for the last few years. Namely, something new seems to be at our throats. We call it wokeism, identity politics. We're having a hard time naming it, grasping it, responding to it. And I think this is one of the challenges that conservatism must face, is how it is we confront this thing. So what I want to do is talk about the various Western wounds that have occurred. The French Revolution, Marxism. We had a couple of re-enchantment movements in there, National Socialism and Fascism, which importantly went to pre-Christian tropes, pagan tropes, very important. And now I'm submitting to us that we have identity politics. And the question is, what are they? Are they political at all? I mean, you could say Marxism is a political movement, and the French Revolution is understood, it's taught in political science departments and history departments. And identity politics is called identity politics. But it's not clear to me that that's adequate. Tocqueville's known for writing Democracy in America, but his other great work, which he didn't complete, was The Old Regime in the French Revolution. Written, I don't know, 5-10, he never completed it, but he started it 5-10 years before he died. And he comes up with this extraordinary phrase, and he says, the French Revolution wasn't a pure political revolution, it was an incomplete religion. Now this raises all sorts of questions. Why would you need an incomplete religion? What would draw you to an incomplete religion? And one answer is, you're drawn to an incomplete religion when your religion has faltered. Now one answer is, well, look, we have secularism. We don't need anything like religion. We don't need pure religion or even incomplete religions. But Tocqueville in Democracy in America says this, it's in Volume 1, Part 2, Chapter 9, 18th century philosophers had the idea that religious zeal would die down as enlightenment and freedom spread. It is tiresome that the facts do not fit the theory. So he saw that this whole claim that the world would be secular was never going to work. And I think the insight that he has is that when religions start to falter, you don't get secularism, you get incomplete religions. And he saw the French Revolution as an incomplete religion. And I want to talk about the French Revolution, Marxism, and identity politics as three incomplete religions. And what's characteristic about them is that they unconserve. They tear apart. And I think we need to do a diagnosis of the three different incomplete religions with a view maybe to understanding what conservatives face, because one could argue, I think fairly cogently, that the twin moments of the fusionist movement, the libertarians and the traditionalists, were each responding to different incomplete religions. So the traditionalists, who go back to Burke and see Burke as the beginning there, are looking at Burke's reflections on the revolution in France. And so they invoke tradition with a view to the kind of Jacobin aspiration for equality that destroys all tradition. So one wing of fusionism was attacking the first incomplete religion, French Revolution, and the libertarians were answering the second wing of the second incomplete religion, namely Marxism, with free market economics. And if I could jump right to my point, and we could go home if I had already laid it out, I'm submitting that we now have a third incomplete religion, which is identity politics. And that part of the reason the two factions of the conservative movement, one of which responded to the first incomplete and the other which responded to the second incomplete, is that we don't understand that there's a third incomplete upon us right now. That's my general thesis. Now, let's talk about the first one, the French Revolution. You should know that the whole of democracy in America was written under the shadow of the French Revolution. Every line you read in Democracy in America, think French Revolution. Why? Because what Tocqueville saw was that the French Revolution was a universalist revolution. It sought to destroy everything. Everything particular was incomplete. And so when he comes to America and sees all these Americans who are fixed on their mediating institutions, and they honor their mediating institutions and hand down what their fathers and mothers have given them with reverence, he sees an antidote to this universalist aspiration, this incomplete religion that established or set up in the minds of its adherents a perfected world on the basis of which everything in the world was to be evaluated. And so Hegel got this. Hegel rightly said that when you have a universalist aspiration, the only possible response you can have to particularism is what he called the fury of destruction. We see this now in the cosmopolitan movements, which respond to any claim that my nation matters, that my religion matters. I'm not spiritual, I'm religious. You can be spiritual because you hover over the particular. You're universal, right? How many of our friends say, well, I'm spiritual, not religious? No. That's a French Revolution understanding. And so the first wave, I think, of the conservative movement, which really, I'm not going to say it begins with Burke, because I know you have a longer answer, but what Burke does is he sees this problem of universalism and sees the particulars are necessary. So the problem with the universalist aspiration is the only possible response to particular commitments is the fury of destruction. The only possible response, which is why our cosmopolitan elites can only see in those of us who are defending the nation a kind of parochial, backward, blood and soil nationalism. That's the only way they can think of it. So that first revolution, that first incomplete religion is still very much with us. Also, one could add Romanticism. Hegel saw the beautiful soul as a necessary consequence of this universalist aspiration. And I tell my students at Georgetown and elsewhere that they're all beautiful souls. They hover over the world. They see the perfection that's possible. They don't dare enter into a covenant relationship between a man and a woman for life because that limits them. Right? So the beautiful soul, all of my students are all beautiful souls. They hover over the world. We're all tempted by cosmopolitanism. And Tocqueville saw this which is why he said the only antidote to this is to throw people into the mediating institutions such that they clip the wings of their imagination and discover that freedom does not consist of being unbound from them, but living through them, and discovering that our freedom is through the salutary obedience, say, to Scripture. So that's the French Revolution. That's the first incomplete religion. It's still with us. Marxism, what can we say about that? Well, Vogelin famously said, Eric Vogelin, some of you know this, he famously said, Marxism immanentizes the eschaton, by which he meant that there is a Christian understanding of an unfolding of history, and Marxism gives us a human account, so to speak. It's not a divine account. And it has this Christian structure, which I'll do this dialectically: unity, diremption, reunification, original innocence, loss of innocence, alienation, reunification. So it takes this Christian structure, which could be seen as dialectical, and renders it in a comprehensive scheme. So what we have to do is we have to move past the Edenic world of scarcity, where we toil by the sweat of our brow amidst the thorns. We have to move past that. We have to move past alienation, by which is meant that condition in which human beings are unknown to themselves, to transparency. This is a profound temptation even today among young people, whether they're Marxists or not. And you can be a Rousseauian and see this too, this longing for authenticity and transparency. If I'm going to be honest with you and you're going to be honest with me, and if we're just honest with each other, it's all going to work out. No, you'll create monsters if you do that. It will not happen. And what I think Tocqueville saw is that this urge for transparency that is in its, I mean, he anticipates Marx in some ways. In some of his writings on economics, it's better than Marx. But this urge for transparency, which you see also in the French Revolution, is an incredibly dangerous urge. And we have to recognize, to use Tocqueville's language, that the best we're going to get, and this dovetails what Yoram has said wonderfully, is translucence. We're not going to fully understand one another. That's okay. And in the parts where we don't understand one another, what we do is we rely on the formalities of life, and we honor one another. Okay? And that will get you through. But if you search for transparency, it will never work. But this is generally what the Marxist revolution does. And so it's going to attack all the existing institutions, which are seen as artifacts of a particular distorted class consciousness. So the so-called bourgeois family, et cetera. Church understood as the opiate of the masses, right? So Marx famously said that communism is the abolition of the current state of things. And I submit to you that every incomplete religion has that as its object, the abolition of the current state of things. One other thing I would say about Marx, which I think conservatives could critique, if you read the Communist Manifesto, the first thing you discover is he tells you in the first several sentences, we've discovered the meaning of history, the riddle of history. The riddle of history is one thing, it's class consciousness. Now, if you read your Burke, you'll find a beautiful passage. If I have one passage from Burke that I would recommend, it's this exquisite passage in which he distinguishes between the excellence of simplicity and the excellence of composition. And he says the revolutionary mind is always thinking in terms of the excellence of simplicity. There's just one thing we have to do, and everything else we're not going to worry about. COVID, it's the one thing we have to pay attention to. The fact that people's lives are going to be ruined, it doesn't matter. And Burke sets up this revolutionary frame of mind, and he distinguishes it from, let's call it the conservative frame of mind, which is the excellence of composition, where you say, well, yes, COVID's a problem, but there's all these other things too. And we need to exercise prudential judgment. We need to listen to those who are perhaps wiser than us. And we'll still address the problem, but we're not going to do it with this revolutionary frame of mind where we say, no, there's just this one problem. And I would submit that even Reaganism in the 1980s, market efficiency is the one thing we have to pay attention to. And conservatives have to answer that. They say they're committed to the excellence of composition, but nevertheless, there has been a history, I think in the Reagan era it shows it, of thinking in simplistic terms about how we think about social policy, and conservatives have to answer for that. The conservative mind thinks in terms of the elegance of composition. That is why Tocqueville said, the aristocratic mind thinks only of amelioration, the democratic mind only of change. Let's focus on one thing. Whenever you hear people saying there are problems to be solved, you know you're dealing with a democratic soul. When you're encountering people who say, well, let's try a little bit of this, let's take this next step, and let's see where it takes us, then you know you're dealing with conservatives. And this habit of mind is very, very important. It must be cultivated. And I say to my students after teaching Tocqueville for 40 years, that unless that habit of mind is cultivated, there's no way we can save mediating institutions. Because what we know in our mediating institutions is, well, the family has one set of important things we're supposed to honor, and markets are another, and school is another, and there's no simple answer. Now, the revolutionary mind says, no, everything can be rendered in terms of economic calculus, so you're not a student, you're a consumer. Yes? There are these habits of mind that we have to think about if we want to conserve. And I think Tocqueville saw this. I think the critique of Marxism is very clear. But there's another thing that I think is affecting us right now, and it's identity politics. It does un-conserve. I know it's an awkward phrase, but let me distinguish it from Marxism for a minute. So Marxism immanentizes the eschaton. That is to say, it takes the very Christian understanding of original innocence, loss, and reunification, and renders it as primitive communism, the stages of alienation, communism again. It's not by accident that the first stage is called the same thing as the last. It must be. Theoretically, it must be for Marx. But that's not what identity politics does. It does not immanentize the scapegoat. It immanentizes the scapegoat, not immanentizes the eschaton. So from a Christian vantage point, there is one sufficient scapegoat that takes away the sins of the world. One and only scapegoat. One and only innocent victim. Think about this when you talk to people who are talking about identity politics. The central category is the innocent victim. The central category is the innocent victim. Christianly understood, there's only one innocent victim. You must remember this. Because what identity politics does, the incomplete religion of identity politics, what it does is it takes this vertical relationship between transgressor and innocent victim, who is the scapegoat, and it turns it horizontally. And it says, I am the innocent victim, and you are the transgressor. And we can solve the problem of life by figuring out an intersectional scorecard according to which certain people are labeled prime transgressors, and for the moment it's the white heterosexual male. And then the more intersectional score points you get, the more of an innocent victim you are, and the more the transgressors have to shut up and listen to you when you speak, and the transgressors have nothing to say. They must be silenced now because the innocent victim has been suppressed for thousands of years. They get the right to speak. There's not a politics of competence anymore. We're not building a world here with others based on the past. No, no, no. The only thing we're doing, because we're at the end of history now and settling scores, the only thing we're doing is allowing those who have been silenced to speak. And so we have to find endless victims, and once we get done with one, we have to find another, and that we're moving now to the transgender, and it will be Mambla after that, and who knows what it will be after that. I suspect it will be animals. Don't laugh. That's where it's going. You have to constantly find the outsider who has been rendered invisible. It's a profound distortion of Christianity. Now, the problem is that it's partly Christian. What it gets right is the category of irredeemable stain. It's not an accident that Hillary Clinton called them the irredeemables and the deplorables. This is not an accident. It's theologically correct. Not that they are, but that category exists. And the Christian understands this as a problem that man alone cannot solve. Unpayable debt, which is what identity politics talks about, except that it leaves us with the Good Friday, the agony of the cross, but no Easter Sunday. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. And so you have, at precisely the moment when Christianity falters, call it the 20th century, you have the visibility of slavery appearing on our televisions in the 1950s and 1960s. You have colonialism falling apart in Africa and the rest of the world, European colonialism. The weight of World War II and the guilt associated with the Holocaust, and you have no mechanism left on the basis of which that weight can be lifted. None. And so identity politics comes to you, and here's the un-conserving part, and it says, "Come unto me, all of you who are weary, with the weight of your nation's history, with the burden of slavery, with the burden of colonialism, with the burden of the Holocaust. Come unto me, all of you who are weary, and I will give you absolution." And all you have to do is renounce your nation, your history, your statues, your heteronormative family, your homophobic church. That's all you need to do. And tens of millions of people who experience guilt and have no way to discharge it are taking up that bargain. And so what I'm suggesting to you is that in our discussion of how to conserve, if we're serious about wrestling with the contemporary moment, which is a third incomplete religion, not fixed on class relations as Marx's was. This is why Bernie Sanders will always be ineffective in America. Class is not the central category in America. We're a Christian country. We know guilt and sin. That's how identity politics can race through the institutions in a year or two, and Marxism never could. We have to understand that what we're dealing with is an account of sin and transgression which people need, and they can't find it in the churches anymore because it's all the God of love. And if it's only the God of love, people will look elsewhere to find the economy of transgression, and they found it in identity politics. And if we are going to conserve, we have to understand that the bet people are making is the only way I can lift the burden of my debt is to destroy our inheritance. I'll stop with that.
Thanks, Josh. All right, I'm going to exercise moderator's privilege and ask the first question, but please be thinking of your own. This is going to combine in some ways, I think, the insights of both Yoram and Josh. In both your talks, you use words like weight. We talk about clipped wings. There's density here, right? There's another Christian theologian, I think it was Henri de Lubac, sorry if it wasn't, but where he talks about the condition of our time being the waning of ontological density. Right? There's a loss of ballast. There's a lot of weightiness, a loss of weightiness, right? Things are made hollow, things are made light. And over the weekend, I gestured to Sylvia Plath's diary, in which she says she recognizes this lack of feeling. She laments that she is hollow. She lacks ballast. She lacks weight. And so she goes searching for it. And she recognizes that there's probably three resources that might provide this weight. And she casts them this way. She says original sin is one option. Adoring Hitler is the second option. And the third option is smoking opium, right? This immediately sort of signals that if you can't find genuine transcendence, you're going to look for false transcendence, right? Those are your options. Gil Bailey, another Catholic thinker, has recast those three options. The original sin is Christian anthropology, which you both have gestured to. Adoring Hitler is ideological fanaticism, which is arguably identity politics, Marxism, etc. And this smoking opium is escapist self-delusion, which I think you also see. We didn't talk directly about narcotics, but there is a narcoticizing effect of some of these false means of transcendence. You both gestured toward original sin. I don't know if you used the word at the lecture you had over the weekend as a way of re-encountering or finding true transcendence. Take all of that and combine it with what I think is the last sentence of your book. Right? Conservatism begins in the home. And, it seems like you talked about love, and I think very clearly, I write a lot about this, we get love wrong. Love is at least other-centered self-donation, right? Which incorporates all sorts of interesting things. There's a self to donate. There's a self worth donating. There's a self that's worth receiving, all of that. Instead, we go about our lives in our search for false transcendence. Not doing other-centered acts of self-donation, but self-centered acts of other donation. Right? That's the scapegoat mechanism, it seems. When you talk about giving honor where honor is due, that immediately makes it not about me. Right? There is a fact that I can agree to or disagree to, but I don't get to choose it. Things are due certain weight. And so to not honor something appropriately is a crime against justice. I'm not giving you your due. It's a crime against order. And if I don't have justice and order, I'm not going to have peace. So I see how it all goes together. How is the remedy? I guess one of the questions is, what allows for the doing of that hard duty? What allows for that to happen? How does conservatism begin in the home? Right? How do I take all these things and realize, the individual has a part, and that conservatism begins with me. Where does all that sit? And maybe that's a question for Yoram, and Josh can respond.
Okay, so can you hear me? How does conservatism begins at home, and honor begins at home? You can start different places, because a child grows up within a family, and a child learns to give honor first and foremost from his parents. But it's also true that that a child who sees his father and his mother, her father and her mother, giving honor to one another, who sees it and lives it, grows up with an intuition of what it looks like. That a child who is watching his parents, just be fully honest with one another, no matter the consequences, all the time, that the child doesn't develop an intuition, an ear for moments when honor is especially appropriate. Let me throw in another topic that I go into at some length in my book, which is that the traditional family is not the nuclear family. The traditional family is a family in which, the nuclear family is this model where there's a husband and wife and 2 or 3 kids. They live alone in a home, and in the version that that was constructed in the 1950s, that's a detached home. The father goes away from home every day for most of the hours of the day to work somewhere, and the children go away from the home somewhere in order to be educated, and then the mother, the wife, is left in the home in order to make the home without any of the people that the home used to be made out of. And if you just think that 100 years back or 150 years back, I mean, almost nobody lived in that kind of a home. People lived in homes where likely there were still grandparents around. Likely adult children were raising their children in the community. Maybe not all of them, but certainly some of them. Parents had brothers and sisters. Some of them were living in the community, and they were part of the family. And all of them were part of a congregation, which is an extended adopted family, even for those who have no family. But the congregation acts as the big family that the child grows up in. You're having trouble with your parents, you don't know how to solve it, then you talk to a grandparent, you talk to an aunt and uncle, you develop neighbors who help you grow up when there are obstacles, or the members of the church, the clergy, the rabbi. And so on the one hand, when you look into this, it becomes extremely difficult to imagine how we can do this, because in order to get to a society that's giving honor, you need to go back to a kind of family that has stopped existing, a family where husband and wife and children are a business enterprise, and they work together in order to achieve concrete goals. They're not always abandoning one another. So the family vacation isn't the thing that's supposed to save them. But I think if I'd been raising these issues 5 years ago, then I would have been sure that people can't really understand what I'm talking about. But because we had this experience of COVID, and many people started to reconstruct things that look like the traditional family. I mean, you know, in homes that are too small and not built for it. But we all know people who, you know, went across the country to go live with their parents, and all of a sudden, business was moved back into the home for the first time in a century. The home became the workplace. The home became the church. Families started, you know, in our family, we stopped going. We had to stop going to synagogue for more than a year, and we had to learn how to create religious services in our home ourselves. So the business came back a bit into the home, and the schools came back a bit into the home, and religion came back into the home as something that the parents or the grandparents are responsible for, and the multi-generational family began to, you know, to have some kind of substance again. Many, many, many people have seen in the last couple of years a glimpse of a totally different family life, which is structured by honor. And I actually have some optimism that, you know, this craziness has actually opened a path for people to be able to understand where we need to go.
It's going to sound like I'm starting very far away from our topic, but I'm not. So in the opening passages of Plato's Republic, why am I there, you're wondering already? You have, look, the book is about justice and about the politics, and he's down in the marketplace. He's not up hanging out with politicians. Now, look, Plato's Republic was written at a time when he concluded that Athenian democracy, the rot was so deep that this was a soul problem. And the whole of the Republic is an investigation into kinds of souls and the kinds of longings they have and the distortions they have. Now, I didn't know what Yoram's second book was going to be about. And Yoram doesn't know what I'm writing about. I'm writing a book called The Gentle Seduction of Tyranny. And what I'm arguing, and I love what Yoram is doing, he's saying, look, we can have all these ideas, that's great. But we're going to have to reconstruct this at the most basic level of human experience in our lived institutions. And if we don't do that, it's completely lost. And my variant of that is if we continue to deceive ourselves that the problem of sin and guilt can be disposed of by saying it's you, as Adam and Eve did, the serpent made me do it, the woman who you gave me made me do it, my favorite line in Genesis, okay? That those are the first words uttered suggest that there's a deep problem in human beings, that we're always looking out there. And my view of this is this disease is probably perennial. It has no antidote. So the Christian churches in America should be the antidote to this. They should be the corrective. And every Sunday service, people should be saying, well, I know you're looking out there, and you could do the race thing too here easily. Blacks were the scapegoats, okay? This is so unbelievably non-Christian, right? It's anti-Christian. So the scapegoating problem is a profound problem, and my view is it doesn't matter who you elect. If we've got a culture that can't, and this is back to depth and gravity, that can't say the problem is in me, and there's this terrible weight, not the one that gives me substance, but there's also this terrible weight, right? And until you say there is this terrible weight and it must be lifted and I can't scapegoat this group or the other group, this doesn't end. So this is a profound problem in the soul, and I think that's what Yoram is saying, looking at different examples, but I was moved almost to tears when you were talking about what honor means. Not an argument, but what it means. And that's what we're going to have to do. It's deeper than politics, but it bears decisively on politics.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. Open it up to questions. And Rebecca, I saw your hand.
So, it's right here, and I am persuaded by both of what you have said. And in fact, I find a lot of it that I'm doing in my own life, by God's grace. We're trying to do this week with our children. And we are in a community, and we are in a church congregation who is doing these things. We can see it, and I long for other people to have the same kind of church community, congregation who you can trust your own children with, churches that are catechizing their children can know. And I see that, I don't know how to get from that to then solving the political question, which is I need a political public square that is friendly to that, and I can't wait 50 years, 100 years. So I have this conservative soul, I know that it's slow, it takes a long time, it's inculcating it in your children, it's in your marriage, it's how you treat other people, it's the way you give others an authority. I get all that, but then how do I guess the thing that I've long struggled with over the last several years that we've been grappling with this, how do you take that and then make it a political, I don't even want to say movement, ideology, I don't know what it is. How do you bridge that gap? She said, and not to make it just go, it can't be revolutionary. That's not even conservative. So how do I do that in a way that's fast enough so that my children can then also enjoy it and pass it on to their children, or before the whole thing is just destroyed? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah, do you want to start?
Sure. So but mine is an all of the above strategy. So rhetorically, I want to, and I think it's sort of existentially true that, and Plato said this, you can pass all the laws you want, but if the souls of your citizens are corrupted, forget it. It's not going to work. So I think we always have to keep in mind the old adage, one soul at a time. However, in the long run, we're dead, right? Some variant of this. So I think we have to have a both-and strategy, that we do what we can politically, but with the full knowledge, we can never be deceived into thinking that if we just elect such and such a Republican or whoever, that everything's going to be fine. We have to constantly involve ourselves in the existential battle. But, forgive my Tocqueville, the knowledge of how to combine is the mother of all knowledges. What we have to do is to do our effort to build, to use Yoram's language, I'm stealing it right from you, Yoram, I hope you don't mind, build the tribe, build the coalition, reach out and find the people who know that we're doing something wrong and we have to build a new coalition, and do everything in our power to exercise our political rights to change policy. But with the full knowledge that that's not enough. I mean, that's the tragedy of politics, is that we both have to be political, but we know that it's not enough. That's the fate of human beings in this world of time here below. It's a both-and strategy.
So then, can I do a real quick follow-up? I want to hear you too, Joram.
Well, look, I think there's two crucial questions, and we've mostly been talking about the personal aspect and the soul. And I completely agree with you. We don't have 50 years. No, we don't have anything remotely resembling 50 years. But I think to understand what needs to be done, I'm sure that there are all sorts of things that need to be done, but to understand what needs to be done, we have to ask the question, what are the key things that are being dishonored and leading to dissolution? And we have to reverse that. Now, the good news is that giving honor in the public sphere is actually something that anyone who's actively involved actually can do. Meaning that yes, I agree. There needs to be, let's say, the kind of legislation, the kind of government that is actively pursuing returning Bible into the curriculum and into public life and into political life. But you don't need to wait for that to happen to get started. You can start tomorrow. If you're a teacher, you can include the Bible in your coursework. I mean, I'm looking at you academics, like all these Christian and Jewish academics that always have these brilliant curricula that never ever include the Bible. I'm talking to you. You are dishonoring our tradition. So you can start with the Bible in where you teach. You can start on the school board and say, we're just not going to we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to put Bible in the schools, and then we'll fight it out all the way up to the Supreme Court. And if it takes 5 years, great. If it takes 50 years, great. That's what we're going to do. And anyone who's in public life, if you're a businessman, I mean, Josh is right. Businessmen and women are completely sunk into the world of thinking. How can we give honor to the woke movement, to the people who are pushing that religion, that ideology, that worldview? they don't have any brain cells for how can we give honor to, to married couples who have children. How can we give honor to, grandparents who are part of the family and not abandoned and sent into old age homes, but are actually being taken care of in their old age by their children? How can we give honor to people who serve in the military? See, the problem is that there is no egalitarianism. Look, you can be equal at the, you can be biblically equal. You go to the judge, and the judge is going to say, justice requires that I not favor you because you're wealthy, or because you're poor, or because you're black, or because you're white. That kind of equality, that's great, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the equality of all choices, the equality of all options. So our public figures they restrain themselves from saying, we have to take our hats off. We have to thank God for the married couples, for the grandparents, for the people serving on the school boards, for the people serving in the military. And every time that you give honor to something like that, for the people who study Scripture and teach it, who are constantly talking about Scripture and teaching it to our society, every time you say something like that, you are implicitly saying that the person you're honoring is better than the person who you have not mentioned, okay, or maybe actively dishonored. In other words, we have to say the norms in our society begin with us. The norms in our society begin with what we choose to honor every single day in every setting. And when you think like that, then, that's very quickly, I think it can very quickly become an active political movement that includes changes in schools and includes legislation and includes presidential candidates. There's no big obstacle to people honoring what's supposed to be honored in all these arenas, except that they're afraid. They're just afraid. They're afraid that people think they're primitives. They're afraid that people think they're prejudiced. They're just afraid. So you want to save your country? You want to save, this wonderful set of nations that's been the West? You yourself, not at the polling, just at the polling, but you yourself have the ability to decide, I'm going to give honor to things that nobody else is honoring today. And let's see who follows me.
Let me give I think a very interesting sociological twist to this, which confirms what Yoram is saying, but let me just do this through the lens of Tocqueville. So Tocqueville's generalized problem is, as you move from the aristocratic age to the democratic age, the mediational layer, the aristocrats, the nobles, get destroyed, and there's a great big question, so what's going to fill that mediational layer? And his answer is mediating institutions. So without mediating institutions, you don't save democratic equality. Question, what do you learn in those mediating institutions? You learn really how to rule and be ruled. You learn what is to be honored and what is not to be honored. And his argument is the more you destroy those mediating institutions, the more you make genuine equality impossible. So the paradox, get the paradox, equality is only possible if you have mediating institutions which allow us to make distinctions and honor certain things and not honor other things.
Please.
Thank you, both of you, for your talk. I found it really fascinating, very persuasive. So I mostly agree with you. But on the point about sort of honor, it seems like a lot of the argument for example, the pro-Trump conservatives was essentially that look, we've been fighting the left with one hand tied behind our back because we have stuck to things like norms, civility, decency, honor, maybe even, whereas the left has kind of gone low. They've taken to not playing by the rules, not playing fair, lying about conservative politicians, and so I think the argument was largely that when you have a society that values things like honor or certain norms, when you have some kind of social contract, some society operating under social contract theory, and one side violates those norms, like norms of honor, for instance, and the other side does not, the side that violates them seems to get some kind of comparative advantage out of that. And so you run into this sort of prisoner's dilemma when one side violates the honor code, for instance, it becomes advantageous for both sides to abandon the honor code. So I suppose my question would be, do you buy that? And if so, how do you avoid that? How do you set up an honorable society such that it doesn't fall back into these same problems?
Me?
I'll go too, but go ahead.
It's a superb question, and I don't think I have a worked out answer for it, but I'll begin. I don't buy the, well, look, I do agree that politics is it is a nasty business, and it is if you don't understand that what's going on is nonstop contests of power, and that that Machiavelli is closer to describing what's going on than than people who are blind to this kind of thing. So you don't understand the world of politics. Politics really is like that. But now let's go to the question of does that mean that that the most effective thing in a democracy is nonstop dishonoring anybody who disagrees with you? Well, that's an empirical question. I don't know if I can answer it. Meaning, I don't know what the actual answer is, but I do know that on the one hand, it's true that Trump won by willing to say things that nobody else was willing to say. Right? That's true. His popularity comes directly from his willingness to say, I don't care what the customs and norms are. There's true things that we've just got to say. Right? People responded to that because they felt that the truth wasn't being said, and that's for real. By the way, Barack Obama is pretty darn uninterested in maintaining norms himself. He's a little bit more slick, but I think that to blame it all on Trump without looking at how incredibly offensive Obama was, I think it's an incomplete picture. But so let's put that on one side of the scale. That if everybody's being polite about something, and the truth has to be said, and all the people who are capable of saying the truth politely are not willing to say it because they don't have the guts to say it. So the person who's going to end up getting picking up the popularity is someone who is utterly offensive and doesn't care what anybody thinks. Maybe that was just what was needed, but I don't think we need to turn that. In fact, I'm sure we don't need to turn that into like a general principle. Offensive people win in political contests. I think that's not the case. I think that that Americans are still a people, even though the traditions have been shot to pieces, and I think we need to understand that there still is a tradition, a common sense that likes decency, that likes moderation, that appreciates putting the good of the nation above. Do I absolutely have to smash my opponent in this particular argument? So, look, like I say, we have to try it and find out. But I think that what we're going to find out is you can succeed, as a journalist, as an intellectual, as a public personality, with a flamboyant style and colorful language and incisive cutting theories and thoughts, and saying things nobody else is saying, going for a truth nobody else is going, and you do not need to abuse and demean and throw your opponent into the mud and then dive in with him to be down there. I think that's just not a necessary part of what has to happen now.
Old men plant young trees and young men plant old trees. Why am I saying that? I don't think there's an in-principle resolution to this, but I think what I observe is that there's a there's a group of young men in the new conservative movement who have borne the brunt of identity politics. The future is female. Go do pornography and drugs and just leave us alone. And that group of men is very angry. And then there's, I won't count Yoram, I'll count me, because I'm, I think, a fair amount older. But I think the older ones are saying, look, the conservative idea is to move one step at a time. And arguments I've had, I'm not going to name them, with some of the young Turks, so to speak, have ended with me saying, look, if you are inculcating these revolutionary habits, you're going to crush and smash. You're not going to change those habits when you win. You're not going to become conservative once you use revolutionary tactics. So I don't think there's an in-principle answer, because these are terrible, rough times right now, and I have a certain admiration for the guys who are ready to fight. But I think ultimately, neither one of us are going to be exactly right, but there is a generational tension we're going to have to recognize here. And I'm prepared to just constantly note it and ask you guys to temper a bit. And I'm glad you guys have said, to the guys even older than me, you coward. You gave up. You didn't say anything. You were prepared to lose as long as you could have your book clubs and read your Aristotle. And that's not right.
You know, I actually would like to add one other point to this thought, which is that there's sort of a common view of Burke. Josh mentioned that in my book I start the Anglo-American conservative tradition at least 300 years before Burke. So it's a view that I think includes a whole lot more of the tradition and what it is we're talking about and thinking about when we talk about conservatism. But to focus for a moment on Burke and his great teacher, John Selden, from the early 1600s, both of them are really clear that the goal is not stasis. The goal is not for things to remain the same. Conservatives are not trying to keep everything the same. That's impossible, because circumstances change and people change, and movements rise and fall. And the goal of the conservative is, when you see that things are going off the track, like that things are just not working out, you want to be in a position to be able to restore things from the past. Restoration is not turning back the clock. It's impossible. There's no way to turn back the clock. But there are many of these examples of seeing things going off the track, like Matthew Hale, a great conservative thinker and jurist, who was the one who officially proposed restoring the line of kings in Britain after the republicanism. In my book, I argue that George Washington and the Federalist Party are that kind of a restorationist movement, that they sought with the Constitution of 1787 and with the Bill of Rights to restore traditional English forms adapted to America. But that's what they were trying to do, because they thought disaster was coming without it. There's in Selden and Burke and other such thinkers, you don't find a claim that says, no matter what's happening, you always have to be really, really slow. Okay, that's a caricature. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in any text. In fact, the opposite. Burke was comparing the French Revolution to the Polish Revolution, and he despised the French Revolution for all sorts of reasons that we've discussed and can discuss. But people don't remember that he was a great supporter and enthusiast of the Polish Revolution. What he thought was happening in Poland was a country that had reached the point of inability to make decisions of any kind to protect itself and to advance itself, because of a constitution which was poorly constructed. And the move to create a constitutional monarchy that was much more similar to Britain's was something that he cheered. In other words, the problem was not that there was a quick movement in the French Revolution. The problem was that instead of taking a model that had been known to work and building towards that. They were doing the opposite. They were taking models that were known to work and just destroying everything. That's what the actual argument is about. And so I don't want to be encouraging conservatives in this generation to always take small steps. The size of the step has to be fit to the size of the problem and the urgency of the problem. And if you can take a smaller step, these guys definitely think you should. Why? Because you don't know the consequences. The bigger the step, the more crazy the consequences are. That's true. But nobody's talking about doing things slowly. If you can find models that work from the past, and you're trying to restore past useful, functional, good models, and you can do that quickly, then you should do it quickly. The place where I think Burke would disagree with the Young Turks who are saying revolution now, violence now, whatever it takes. I think he would just say, you don't understand politics. You want to be able to move really quickly? Well, there's two ways to move really quickly. One way is you build a coalition of people who can see the need and they go with you, right? And then you have a cohesive restoration and your country is really healed to a significant degree. And the other way is you're not going to bother with convincing anybody. You don't care about your coalition. So what are you going to do? You're going to grab some guys with guns and you're going to go start shooting in the hope that you're going to bring the whole thing down. And then if you do and you don't end up dead, that you'll also have a better scheme that's going to work better. Right? No conservative can respect that. So I think large steps are fine. But they've got to have a coalition, and the coalition has many different kinds of people in it. And to have that coalition stick, you're back to honor again, honoring all the different parts of the coalition, so that you can have something solid to move forward with.
Now, I saw that there are additional questions. We're out of time, but the good news is if you pay attention, you'll see there's very narrow escape avenues here. And so if you move forward and fill them, then you can pigeonhole our guests for a little while longer. So, Yoram Hazoni, Josh Mitchell, thank you very much. Please.